Nicky whimpered. She bit her lower lip, trying to keep it from trembling, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. "Please, don't make me." Susie just stared at her, her blue eyes unblinking and unrelenting. The pain in her head increased slightly, and the girl winced, almost crying out as the sharp reminder of who was in control stabbed into her brain, nearly blinding her. "Please, stop!" Susie increased the pain again. Nicky grasped at her head, a small cry falling from her mouth before she could stop it. Nicky looked towards the door, half hoping it would open and her mother would come in to check on her. Of course, she knew that wouldn't happen. She was with Susie, and her parents trusted that she was safe with her. They didn't know the things Susie could do, the things she made Nicky do. They didn't know how evil her new friend was. Nicky felt the pain increase even more as she thought the word evil. "I'm sorry." She rolled into a fetal position and threw her arms over her head to try and block the assault. The pain in her head lessened, but only a little. It wouldn't go away completely until she did what Susie wanted. Grudgingly, Nicky went to her bed and reached under the mattress, retrieving the hidden secret that was just between her and Susie. The knife was her mother's favorite cutting knife. She used it to cut vegetables. Nicky's mother had been upset when it came up missing. She looked for it everywhere, except under her 6-year-old daughter's mattress. There was no reason for her to suspect it was there. Nicky pulled back the sleeve that was covering her left arm. The pale skin was covered in scars, some of them just barely scabbing over, and others nearly healed. Putting the sharp edge of the knife to her skin, she pushed against her flesh, hesitantly at first, and then harder, making a small cut. A sliver of blood dribbled out, but it wasn't enough for Susie. She wanted more. Nicky pushed harder until the blood flowed freely. Lifting Susie off the bed, she pressed her arm against the doll's pink lips. The blood stained Susie's mouth red before it seeped in, vanishing and leaving the doll's lips pink and flawless. When Susie was done drinking, Nicky went to the bathroom, washed her arm, and pressed toilet paper against the wound until it stopped bleeding. Then she washed the knife and hid it under the mattress so it would be ready the next time Susie needed to feed. "I'm worried about Nicky," Francine spoke to her husband's back. Barry was watching the game on their new big screen, or at least he was trying to. Francine's insistence on talking about Nicky and the child's recent withdrawal from playtime activities was preventing him from concentrating on it completely. "Honey," Barry tried to sound patient, "I think you're worrying over nothing. She's 6 years old and her cat just died. She's handling this in her own way. When she's ready, she'll come out of her room." "Her cat did not just die. He was mutilated. But it's more than just Frank. There's something wrong. I just don't know what. You know she hasn't played with Cindy for nearly 2 weeks? Kids have fights. And kids make up." Francine tried to get her husband to see. "Nicky and Cindy have had their share of arguments. Every day it would seem, but they never stayed mad for long. It's been nearly 2 weeks, Barry. Nicky just sits up there in her room, holding that doll and talking to herself. It's not normal behavior for a 6-year-old. "What is normal behavior?" Barry turned to look at his wife. "Everyone handles grief differently. She was attached to that cat, and even though she didn't see what happened to him, she knows he is gone. This is her first experience with death. It's going to take her a while. I would be more worried if she were acting as though nothing happened." "I would too, but I don't know how to explain it. There's something creepy about the way she shuts herself in that room with her doll, especially when she was so afraid of her at first. The kid's got an active imagination, and you have to admit, telling her the story about your grandmother probably didn't help. I'm surprised she even wanted the thing after that. Judging from how close she keeps Susie, I would say she got over that. Give her time, and she'll recover from her grief as well." "I have given her time. Now I'm going to do what I should have done in the first place." Francine picked up the phone and dialed a number. Nicky sat on her bed holding Susie. Her arm hurt, but she tried not to think about it. Instead, she tried to remember what life had been like before she found Susie in the attic. The house used to belong to Nicky's grandma, and before that, her great-grandmother. Now it belonged to them. They had been living there for a couple of years before Francine had decided she wanted to clean out the attic. Nicky thought that sounded like an adventure, and quickly volunteered to help. When she found the doll, she wanted her so badly and begged her mother to let her have it. This old thing? Her mother had wrinkled her nose. Why would you want her? Look, the porcelain is cracked. She's beautiful. Nicky had smoothed the hair out. The doll's hair was all matted and tangled, but Nicky didn't care. She would brush it out and make it shine again. Did she used to be yours? Mine? Heavens, no. She was my grandmother's. The one that went batty? Nicky giggled at the image of an old woman turning into a bat. What makes you say she went batty? I heard you and Daddy talking about her one night. He said she went batty and was an old nutter. What does that mean anyway? It means she was troubled. Francine sat down and took the doll from Nicky. She used to hear voices in her head. That was when she was a child, though. She was sent away for a while. When she got out, she was older, but people were a little cautious of her. Why? Because she had done some things that made people scared. She used to say her Susie made her do it. Susie? The doll. She put her in the attic and left her there. We were never allowed to play with her. She would be mortified to know you found her. That's silly, Nicky laughed. She's a beautiful doll. Please, can I have her? Please? She stuck her lower lip out in a way she knew that would get her what she wanted. That night, Nicky learned a new terror. She dressed for bed as she always did, wearing her favorite nightgown that had a picture of her favorite pop star on the front. She climbed into bed and covered up with her blanket and snuggled her new doll into her arms. Then she closed her eyes and tried to go to sleep. She was still trying to sleep when she heard a whisper. I'm hungry. Who's there? Nicky had sat up and looked around. Her nightlight glowed in the corner of the room, allowing her to see that no one was there. Just Frank, her cat. He was sleeping on the end of her bed, and Nicky knew he hadn't said anything. Nicky had lain back down and heard the voice again. Only this time she realized she hadn't heard it with her ears, but inside her head. Who said that? Nicky pulled the covers up over her head. She didn't believe in boogie monsters and knew there wasn't anything in her closet. Her daddy had showed her that one night when she thought she heard something in there. It had only been Frank. He'd been shut in the closet on accident. Nicky's daddy had knocked on the walls to show her there were no secret doors and no way for anyone to get in there. Nicky had wondered if her daddy might have missed a section of the wall and that maybe there was a monster in there. I'm hungry, the voice said again. This time, though, Susie's eyes glowed a little, and Nicky knew the voice came from her. She screamed and ran from the room, crying to her parents that her doll had spoken. You were just dreaming, her mommy said, taking her back into the room and helping her back into bed. And Nicky had to admit that Susie didn't look any different than she did when she'd first seen her in the attic. Go to sleep, sweetie. Her mother had kissed her on the forehead. Then she had left, and Nicky was alone again. I'm hungry. Nicky had looked at her doll, then gone and put her in the closet, shutting the door tight. She climbed back into bed and closed her eyes. I'm hungry. Nicky's eyes flew open. Susie was lying next to her in the bed. Nicky had screamed, and this time it was her daddy that came running. Did you watch any scary movies when you were at Cindy's last night? No. Well, dolls don't talk unless they were made to. And this doll isn't made to talk. And even if she did, what did she say to you? I'm hungry? Maybe you should give her a bottle the next time she says it. Okay. Nicky had a funny feeling in her tummy. She didn't think Susie wanted a bottle. Her father had kissed her on the forehead and left the room, pulling the door behind him, but leaving it cracked just a little. Nicky had laid back down, but not before putting the doll back in the closet. Then she got into the bathroom that was connected to her room. When she was done, the closet door was open, and Susie was back in her bed. Frank was no longer sleeping at the end. He had been sitting up, staring at the doll and growling. Then his growl turned into a whine, and he jumped off the bed and ran out the door. I'm hungry. What do you want to eat? Nicky had asked, her voice shaking. Nicky had tried to resist at first. Susie told her that bad things would happen if she didn't feed her, but Nicky couldn't imagine what could be worse than what Susie wanted her to do. So she refused. The next day, Frank had died. Her parents didn't tell her how it had happened. They didn't even let her see her pet's body, but Nicky knew. Susie had told her how she made the neighbor's dog attack Frank, how the dog had ripped the cat's stomach open and pulled the insides out, trailing intestines across the lawn as though they were streamers left over from a party. Susie had told her the next time she said no, it wouldn't be a cat, but one of her parents. A tear ran down the girl's cheek. She had been a prisoner in her room ever since. Susie insisted she take her with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. She didn't want them to be apart, ever. She told Nikki it was so one day they could be together in one body. Nikki didn't like the sound of that, because either that meant she would become a doll, or Susie would become her. Nikki was only 6, she didn't know how that would work, but she knew it scared her. She wanted to tell her mommy, but then Susie reminded her of what had happened to Frank. She also reminded her of what had happened to her mommy's grandma. Everyone thought she had gone nutters. That was something else Nikki didn't understand, but she knew if she started telling them that Susie had killed Frank and made her give her blood, they would think she'd gone nutters too. Then they might send her away. She wondered about the bad things her grandma had done that made them send her away. She thought it might have to do with blood. "Nikki, come here!" Nikki looked towards her door. Her mother was calling her. Smiling, she jumped up, knocking Susie to the floor. Running towards the door, anxious for the excuse to leave her room, Nikki was nearly through it before a sharp pain shot through her head. "Shit!" Nikki repeated the word her daddy sometimes said when he felt frustrated. Turning, she walked slowly back to the bed and lifted Susie from where she dropped her. "I'm sorry." Then she headed back towards the door, a little slower, and this time taking the doll with her. "I have a surprise for you," Francine said to her daughter when she entered the living room. Before Nikki had a chance to ask what it was, Francine blurted out, "I called Mrs. Turner, and you are going over there to play with Cindy." "I don't want to go outside." Nikki clutched her doll to her. Francine frowned, puzzled by her daughter's reaction. "Sweetie, if the two of you had a fight, it's best to talk about it and put it behind you. You two have been friends too long to let a little disagreement to get between you." "We didn't have a fight. I just don't feel like playing with her." "That doesn't make any sense." Francine's voice sounded strained. "Besides, I told Mrs. Turner you were coming over, and it would be rude to back out now." "But I don't want to!" Nikki tried to fight back tears. "Why?" Nikki didn't say anything. She didn't know what to tell her mother. She couldn't tell her that she didn't want to play with Cindy because she was afraid that Susie would hurt her best friend. That was the other thing. Susie didn't want her playing with anyone but her. But Nikki couldn't tell her mother that. For one thing, she wouldn't believe her. For another, Susie might hurt her mother if she did. "Why don't you want to play with Cindy?" "I don't know." "Then you are going over there, and you will have fun." "Okay." Nikki tried to ignore the sharp pain in her head. "You'll see." Francine gave her daughter a hug. "This will be good for you." "Okay." Nikki didn't sound convinced, but she headed for the door anyway. "Sweetie." Francine put her hand on Nikki's shoulder to stop her. "It's warm outside. Why don't you put on something with shorter sleeves before you go?" "I'm fine." Nikki touched the bottom of her sleeve and tugged at it. Nikki laughed, chasing the soccer ball across the field. Cindy close behind. They were at the park across the street from Cindy's house, and it felt great to be outside. Her head was feeling better too. Nikki was beginning to feel like maybe things were going to be all right after all. It had taken Cindy some time to talk her into playing the ball game with her, but now she was glad she did. At least she was until she got a glimpse of Susie lying in the grass beneath the tree. Her head was turned, looking at her, and she could see that her eyes were beginning to darken. She stopped laughing and came to a stop. "What's wrong?" Cindy asked. "I need to go back home." "What do you mean? You just got here." "I'm tired." Nikki walked over to the tree and picked up her doll. "What is wrong with you?" Cindy put her hands on her hips and glared at her best friend. "Nothing is wrong with me." Nikki hugged Susie and backed away from Cindy. Cindy noticed that Nikki seemed to be trying to keep her from getting too close to the doll and looked at her suspiciously. "Ever since you got that doll, you've been acting strange. What's so special about that thing anyway?" Then, before Nikki could stop her, Cindy grabbed Susie out of her hand and looked at her. "Give her back!" Nikki tried to pull Susie away from Cindy, but the other girl was taller than Nikki, and she held the doll up in the air, taunting her friend with it. "You want her? Then take her from me!" Nikki grabbed at Cindy, trying to pull her arm down and reach her doll. Cindy grabbed hold of Nikki's arm and pushed her back, shoving the girl's sleeve up as she did. Gasping, Cindy dropped the doll and fell to her knees next to her friend, grabbing her arm and pushing the sleeve back even further. "Nikki, what have you done to yourself?" "Please don't tell anyone," Nikki begged, pulling her sleeve back down. "Nikki, I have to." "You'll make her mad," Nikki whispered. "Please don't tell. She'll hurt you." "Who are you talking about?" "Me." "Who said that?" Cindy looked around, but the only thing she saw was Susie, Nikki's doll. "Please no." Nikki looked at Susie and began to cry. "You can't tell anyone. It will ruin everything." Cindy covered her ears, trying to shut the sound out, but they echoed in her head. "You are going to have to die." "No!" Cindy scrambled to her feet and backed away from the doll, whose head had turned and looked directly at her. The doll's eyes were nearly black, and when the thing looked at her, Cindy felt a sharp pain in her head. "You have to die." "No!" Cindy turned and ran for the road, anxious to get away from the doll. She didn't see the car coming as she ran into the road, nor did she hear the sound of tires squealing. She only heard Susie laughing inside her head. Francine stood at the window, watching as the ambulance left with Cindy Turner. Barry had gone out, offered support to Tom and Connie, while she had remained here with Nikki. Now he was heading back to the house. Francine sat on the couch to wait for him. "How's Nikki doing?" he asked when he came through the door. "I don't know," Francine shrugged. "She isn't talking. I tried to find out what happened, but she wouldn't say. Just kept staring at me and holding that doll." "This has got to be traumatic. She just saw her best friend get hit by a car. Where is she?" "In her room. I'm hoping she'll sleep, but I'll be surprised if she does." "I won't do it." Nikki folded her arms defiantly as she glared at her doll. The pain in her head increased. "You told me if I did what you wanted, you wouldn't hurt anyone. You killed Cindy. I won't give you any more." The pain increased more, and Nikki bit her lip, trying not to scream. The taste of copper filled her mouth. Touching her lip, Nikki pulled her hand back and stared at the blood on her finger. Susie's eyes bored into Nikki's. The message was clear. "Feed me." Reluctantly, Nikki picked the doll up and held her lips up to hers as though giving the toy a kiss. Inside the doll, the spirit that was trapped there grew a little stronger. This was the closest she'd gotten to escaping, and could taste his freedom with every drop of the blood she took from the child. How long had she been trapped in this doll? Time eluded Susie, but she knew the previous child was grown and gone. She'd attempted to possess her body and had been repelled by enemies that had attempted to send her back to hell and the master that she had once willingly served. Lucifer wasn't one to share power, and when she'd grown tired of him, she left to build her own kingdom. The Dark Lord had gone after Susie. She had managed to elude him, though, hiding in this doll. Or at least she thought she had eluded him, until she tried to leave. She couldn't. She was trapped. But now, thanks to this child's blood, she was growing stronger, and before long would have enough strength to leave. Then she would possess her, and teach her all the things the girl would need to know. Then, when she was grown, Susie would have enough power to rule this world. "Nikki?" Nikki froze, the doll still pushed to her lip. Her back was to the door so her mother couldn't see the blood. Susie cursed as well. One of the first things she would do once she took over the child's body would be make sure they knew their place. Lowering the doll, Nikki turned towards her mother. Francine was looking at her, a worried expression on her face. "Do you want to talk?" "No." Nikki avoided her mother's gaze. "Are you sure?" Francine stepped into the room and pulled her daughter into her embrace. "What happened today must have been very scary. I know I want to talk." Nikki started crying and buried her head into her mother's shoulder. "Cindy's dead, just like Frank. She's dead, and it's my fault." "Honey, she's not dead." Francine squeezed her daughter. "Is that what you thought? That she was dead? And why would it be your fault?" "She's not dead?" Nikki looked up at her mother, trying to determine if she were telling her the truth. No, I just talked to her mother. She's got some broken bones and had to have surgery, but she's alive and will be for quite a long time. If you feel up to it, I can take you to see her tomorrow." Nikki hesitated before answering. She wanted to see Cindy and make sure she was okay, but she was afraid of what her friend would tell people about her. She could feel Susie's anger as well. Susie didn't want Cindy to be alive. She felt the pain beginning to build inside her head. Connie Turner sat at the side of her daughter's hospital bed, holding Cindy's hand. Her head was resting on the little girl's chest, listening to the rhythmic beating of her heart. She tried to convince herself that Cindy was just sleeping. It was difficult, considering the continuous sound of beeping and whirring from the machines that surrounded her daughter. Connie had slept for a while. She tried not to. Disturbing images of Cindy being hit by the car filled her head. She hadn't seen it, but what happened couldn't be worse than she saw when she closed her eyes and drifted off. In her dreams, Cindy woke in the hospital and kept saying, "The doll," over and over again. Connie didn't know what it meant, but even now, as she listened to her daughter's heart beating, she could hear it pounding those words out to her. "The doll, the doll, the doll." Connie started to drift off again, the sound of Cindy's heart beating its rhythmic chant out to her. "The doll, the doll, the doll." "Mommy?" "Cindy, you're awake." "Where am I?" Cindy's voice was weak. Connie started to answer that she was in the hospital, but then she noticed it was dark, and the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital were gone. So was the sound of the machines that were monitoring her daughter. Connie looked around. She was in their church, St. Michael's. They hadn't gone very often, usually Easter and Christmas. What were they doing there now? The pews were filled with people wearing black clothes, and the aisles were lined with black roses and candles. Everyone was crying. Why were they crying? "Why is everyone crying?" Her voice echoed throughout the sanctuary. Their best friends, Francine and Barry Stedman, sat in the front row. Their daughter Nikki was with them. She was clutching something to her chest. "Nikki, what do you have?" Connie reached for the object that Nikki was holding. Nikki pulled the thing closer to her, wrapping her arms around the object. "Come on, Nikki, you can show me what it is." Nikki shook her head no, but then when Connie leaned closer, she smiled. Blood was dripping from Nikki's teeth, spilling out her lips and dribbling onto her chin. Connie froze, her hands shaking, a scream caught within her throat. Then Nikki turned the object around. It was a doll, and its eyes were black. Then the blackness began to ooze out of the doll's eyes, and Connie realized they weren't black, but red, the dark red of pooling blood. "The doll, the doll, the doll, the doll." Cindy's heart beat loudly. Connie turned to speak to her and saw that she was lying in a casket. Cindy's eyes were open and as black as onyx. "The doll, the doll, the doll." "What's going on here?" Connie screamed. Then she felt something touch her shoulder. She turned and stared into the demonic eyes of Nikki's doll. Connie woke up screaming. She threw her arms in the air, tottered backwards in her chair, and then fell over, hitting her head on the floor. The nurse in the room rushed to help her up and called the doctor in. "I'm sorry." Connie felt silly. "I was having a nightmare." "Small wonder," the doctor said, looking at her head and declaring that she must have had a head made of rock. "Not even a scratch, but I'm going to have to put an ice pack on it." "I'll be fine. Just take care of Cindy for me." "Speaking of which," Dr. Bolus said, "it looks like someone is waking up." "Oh, baby!" Connie pushed herself away from the doctor and rushed to her daughter's side. "Are you all right?" Tom had been standing in the corner silently while the doctors tended to his wife. Now he too rushed to Cindy's side and took her hand. Cindy looked around, trying to understand where she was. "You were hit by the car, but you're going to be okay. It was a terrible accident. You must have been chasing the ball and didn't realize how close to the road you were." "No." Cindy was shaking her head. This wasn't right. She remembered chasing the ball around the field with Nikki. But then something had happened. Something bad. The doll. It had spoken to her. It had said it would kill her. Cindy tried to tell her mom what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she could hear something roaring in her ears. Then the room started to go black. Nikki's mom was coming down the hall. She could hear her footsteps, even though they were light and her mother was trying to make any noise. She pulled Susie's mouth away from her arm and shoved her sleeve back down. She didn't have time to stop the bleeding and hope her mom wouldn't notice the stain spreading across the sleeve. Her dress was red, so maybe she wouldn't see it. Quickly, she shoved the knife back under her mattress. She would clean it later. "Are you ready to go?" Francine came into Nikki's room. She smiled at her daughter, pleased to see she put on a nice dress, although for the life of her she couldn't figure out why she always wore long sleeves. It reminded her too much of her grandmother. She'd always worn long sleeves, even on the hottest summer days. That Nikki had begun covering her arms after playing with her great-grandmother's doll wasn't lost on Francine. The stories of Susie and the evil spirit that inhabited it came to mind all too often. She knew it was silly, but she wanted to grab the doll and put it back in the attic, or it could never hurt Nikki again. "That's strange," Francine thought. "Why would I think that? It's just a doll. It can't hurt anyone." Francine shook her head, trying to laugh off the thought, quickly dismissing it. Still, she worried about how attached Nikki seemed to be to the doll. When Nikki stood to leave, she held the toy in her arms and headed towards the doll. "Honey, why don't you leave Susie here?" Nikki paused, hope rushing through her. If she could just be away from Susie for a little bit, maybe she could figure out what to do about her. Then the pain hit, and she knew Susie wouldn't agree to that, even if her mother insisted. She would have to bring her. "I want her to come with me." Francine thought about arguing with Nikki, but something in her daughter's eyes broke her heart. She looked so sad. Maybe the doll was all that had been holding her together lately. "Okay, well, let's go then. We want to get to the hospital before visiting hours ends." Connie stood outside her daughter's hospital room, watching the doctors work on Cindy. As soon as the monitors attached to the girl's little body had started shrieking, medical personnel had come rushing in the door. One of the nurses had gently ushered Tom and Connie out of the room, whispering to them that Dr. Bolus would take care of Cindy and that she would be all right. "What's going on?" Connie turned towards the voice that spoke, but she didn't answer. Her heart leapt at the sight of Nikki and the doll that she was carrying. It was the same doll from the nightmare. "Cindy woke up," Tom said, "but then something happened. She started shaking and thrashing around on the bed, and all these alarms started going off. We don't know what's happening. They won't tell us anything. I hear that Dr. Bolus is the best the hospital has." "He is." "Nikki, can I see your doll?" Connie reached out for the toy. Nikki clutched Susie tightly and backed away. "Nikki, don't be rude." "I want to see the doll." Connie's voice sounded rough and demanding. "Let me see that doll." "No." Nikki stood her ground. "Susie doesn't want to go to you." "Give me the doll." "Honey, calm down." Tom reached out to touch his wife on the shoulder, but she pulled away from him and lunged for Nikki, who backed away even more. Instinctively, Francine stepped between her daughter and her once rational friend, wondering why she was insistent on holding the doll. "Give it to me!" Connie tried to sidestep Francine. She slipped on the floor, her knee twisting at an unnatural angle. Connie didn't even seem to notice that she'd broken her leg, but tried to get up before Tom pushed her back down and ordered her to stay until he could get someone to help. Nikki turned away from her best friend's mother, no longer afraid she would take Susie from her. Now she turned her attention to the window. She could see Cindy on the bed. She tapped the window, trying to get her friend's attention. Cindy turned her head towards the window, trying to focus her eyes. She had only woken a few moments ago to the calm voices of the nurses and doctor. She could tell, though, they were worried about her. She was trying to remember what happened, but someone kept tapping at the window off to the side. She wished they would stop. She blinked her eyes a couple of times. There was someone at the window, but it was mostly fuzzy. She closed her eyes and then opened them again. It was Nikki. She was afraid of her. Why? One of the monitors started screaming again, and she thought it might have something to do with the tight feeling in her chest. She couldn't breathe too well. What was happening? Then she saw what Nikki was holding up to the window. It was Susie. The doll was staring at her, its black eyes boring into her. Cindy saw the lips turn up in a smile, and what looked like razor-sharp teeth. Nikki's mom pulled her away from the window. "Come on, honey, we need to go. Now isn't a good time to visit. Maybe we'll come back tomorrow." Francine gave Connie a worried look as she pulled Nicky away from the window and down the hall. What had gotten into her? They were halfway down the hall when a scream burst out of the small hospital room before breaking off into deadly silence. Francine worried about the scream, but she worried more about getting Nicky home and away from Connie Turner's bizarre behavior. "We'll come back tomorrow," she promised Nicky, trying to make her voice sound reassuring. Nicky just smiled and nodded. She knew they wouldn't be back. Susie had just told her that Cindy was dead and their secret was safe. "I don't understand what you want me to do." Nicky was confused. Susie said she didn't want her blood anymore. She wanted someone else's. Susie didn't tell her, just stared at her, as she always did, boring pain into her head. Susie wanted what Susie wanted. "What am I supposed to get? How am I supposed to get it?" "Nicky, who are you talking to?" Francine stood inside her daughter's room. She was worried about her. Tom had called just as they walked through the door with news that Cindy was dead. "Her heart just gave out," Tom had said. "Dr. Bolus isn't sure what happened. He said she was strong enough to handle the surgery. I guess these things just happen." His voice had cracked then, and Francine wished she could put her arms around him and give him a hug. Then he went on. "Connie has taken it hard. They had to sedate her." "I am so sorry," Francine had said, and then hung up. What disturbed her was Nicky's reaction. "Cindy's dead, isn't she?" "Oh, honey." Francine bent to hug her daughter, but Nicky had just turned and left. There was even less reaction to the death of her best friend than there had been to the death of her cat. "Do you want to talk?" Francine asked as she entered her daughter's room. "No." Nicky shifted uncomfortably, wishing her mother would leave. Susie was already telling her that her mother's blood would do. The longer she stood there, the more insistent Susie would get. "Well, okay." Her mother sounded disappointed. "Well, go wash up. Dinner is almost ready, and Daddy will be home any moment." Nicky got up off her bed and headed out the door to the bathroom. Francine started to follow her, but something caught her attention. There was blood on the corner of Nicky's bed covers. Curious, Francine lifted the spread to inspect the stain. There was some on the sheet and side of the mattress as well. "What is this from?" Francine mused. She noticed that the mattress didn't seem to be lying flat. Sticking her hand underneath, she felt something sharp cut into her finger. Pulling it out, she saw blood dripping from a wicked-looking cut on her index finger. "What the hell?" Lifting the mattress up, she saw her missing knife, covered in blood. Reaching for it, she pulled the knife out and turned, sitting on the edge of Nicky's bed. Her head was spinning as the implications of the knife struck her. Francine saw Frank in the backyard, his guts strewn across the lawn. The neighbor's dog was eating the liver, but she remembered the wound. "That dog didn't kill Frank," she told Barry. "The wound is too even. It doesn't look would if a dog would torn it apart." Then her grandmother's words all those years ago, when she insisted that Susie was evil when she found herself in the attic. "It's evil," Grandma had said. "You stay away from it. There is a demon inside and it wants out, but she can only get out if she has blood. A lot of it." "But I won't give it any blood," Francine had said. "I promise." "You can't promise that," Grandma had said. "The spirit takes control of your mind, makes you do what it wants. It makes you do horrible things too. It makes children do horrible things, because it can control children, make them do what it wants." Her grandmother had shuddered then. "If I could destroy it, I would." "Why don't you?" "It can't be destroyed. I tried smashing it. It wouldn't break. That alone should tell you it's evil. What kind of porcelain doll doesn't break, even when you dash it against the rocks as hard as you can? So then I tried to burn it. The porcelain cracked, but that was all. The spirit inside held it together. Promise me, Francine, that you won't go near this doll again. Promise me." Francine had promised, but she hadn't meant it. Going back to the attic that night, hoping to sneak into her room, but she couldn't find it. Her grandmother had moved the doll, anticipating that Susie might be too much of a temptation. She hadn't seen it again until Nicky had found it in an old trunk at the back of the attic. And now she had given the doll to her daughter. "Oh my God," Francine thought aloud. "Oh my God. You shouldn't have looked under my bed." Nicky stood in the door, staring at her mother. Susie held tightly against her. "Nikki, give me the doll." "She wants blood, Mommy. I was giving her my blood, but now she wants more. She says once I help her get more blood, we will be together forever, and she won't hurt me anymore." "Give her to me. I won't let her hurt you." "You can't stop her. It's too late. I've given her my blood, and we are almost one. Now she needs yours. I don't want to, but my head hurts, and she won't stop until I do." Nikki started crying. Francine reached her arms out instinctively, pulling her daughter into her, dropping the knife on the bed. "It's going to be okay." "No, it's not." Nikki plunged the knife into her mother's back. Nikki looked out the living room window. Susie was right. Her head did feel better. She could also hear Susie in her head clearer than before. She understood now that she had done the right thing. The two of them together would be strong. Susie said they would go someplace after Nikki did one last task. Nikki smiled. The Turners were home. Nikki turned towards the door and stepped over her father's body. He'd been surprised to see her sitting on the couch, waiting for him when he'd come home. "Nikki, where's your mother?" "She's upstairs in my room. She's sleeping." "In your room? Nikki, is that blood on your dress?" "Daddy, something scary happened today. I need a hug." "Nikki, what happened? Francine?" He ran for the stairs then, calling for his wife, but then he tripped and fell over Susie. The doll stared back at him, her eyes dark. Her lips turned up in a smile. Barry threw himself backwards, away from the thing, pressing his back against the wall. Nikki stood in front of him. "Daddy, Susie and I have a present for you." Nikki looked down at her father. Then she raised the knife. "I'll get the door," Tom said. Connie was sitting on the couch, staring into space. She didn't answer. She just sat there. It's not that she didn't hear him. She did. She just didn't have the energy to answer. She heard Tom open the door and say hello. Then she heard a thud. She didn't think too much about it. It was just a thud like a shoe dropping. Then she heard soft footsteps coming down the hall. That puzzled her. Tom never walked so quietly. Connie didn't turn to look, though. She was still stuck in another place, holding Cindy's hand. She didn't want to turn around. She felt something brush against her neck. "Tom, stop that!" She brushed him away. The tickle came back. "Damn it, Tom, our daughter's dead and all you want to do is play games. What the hell is wrong with you?" Connie turned around, her mouth open to give him a piece of her mind. But Tom wasn't there. Instead, she found herself staring into the glass eyes of Nikki's porcelain doll. The doll's mouth was covered with blood. Behind her, Nikki laughed, blood dripping out of her mouth and down her chin.